Hello, and welcome to our Tuesday evening workshop. We have a lot of fun things planned. We're starting off with a presentation by the Lewiston Housing Committee. If I can have both of you introduce yourselves, and then please proceed.
I'm Kara Corshane, and I'm a member of the Housing Committee.
Dash Padam, I'm a member of the Housing Committee.
So every year we are tasked with presenting to all of you on something of our choosing if we are not given a task. So I thought that I would begin by just reviewing our committee's purpose. We'll talk a little bit about some housing updates. We'll talk about the housing scorecard, which I hope all of you have in front of you, and then leave room for questions and discussion. So last year, you all approved updating the Housing Committee's purpose. So a couple of things that we do: we review and advise you all on housing issues facing Lewiston. We recommend ideas that will improve the housing stock for everybody. We talk about housing programs, and when Link or other members of the staff have thoughts on what we want, like CDBG spending or things like that, they chat with us, and but I don't think we've done that in a while. But so we support the council and the city staff that way as well. We are also, as we're asked, talking about making sure that Lewiston is lead-free by 43, and we have one of those indicators in the housing scorecard. And like all jobs, other duties as assigned by our supervisor. So, new housing. We, I don't know, I think I saw some of you at the opening for the Blake Street Raise Up. New building, and then I think in September they'll open up the Walnut Street building. That's the other part of the development. Last June or July, either way, it happened after the last time we presented to you. Govra Place, 35 units opened up, and Picker House Lots, there was I was just going to say groundbreaking, but I think it was called a brick smashing. There will be 72 units there coming up. Wedgwood, I'm not sure if an email has gone out to you all just yet, but there will be a groundbreaking on July 24th at Wedgwood, which is on the corner of Pierce and Pine. And Susan Collins will be speaking at that, as well as some other folks that you might recognize. And the Wedgwood will have 82 units across 9 buildings, which I'm sure you all are aware of because you've approved a number of planning board pieces for them. DeWitt, which is the other choice development, will have 104 units, and we don't have images of that yet, so that's also part of choice, so I just included their lovely logo there. So, the housing scorecard, which you all have in front of you, the Housing Committee decided that we needed to talk through what our priorities were going to be, and to have a sense of that, we thought that we would look through different indicators. Does anybody have any questions about how we chose those indicators before I get started on that? No? Okay. So the criteria that we chose around each of the indicators was that the source could supply the data on a yearly basis, and that it was easily accessible so that we could replicate it over different years. And we are looking at this to see what the trends are, what might emerge, and also will help us understand the impacts of different policies, both state and local. Do you have anything to add to that piece?
No, you're doing very well. I will add that some of the source data, there was some discussion as to how accurate it was, that we might be able to find a more accurate source, but we opted to go with the easier source because what we're looking to find is a trend.
Yep.
So if we had an indicator that only got 80% of something, well, year over year, it's still going to show the trend.
Right.
So some of these numbers may look a little suspect, or you may think that they're higher or lower, but the purpose of the scorecard was to have something that year over year we can present to you, and we can identify trends to see which direction things are going in.
Yep. And you'll notice that there is 2020, 2021, and 2022. And where we didn't have 2022 data because either it's not available yet, or because there was not funding for it or something like that, we included the 2020 data so that we could at least see a take a 2-year look at the numbers. So we included information about both Lewiston's population, what kind of income we're taking a look at for folks, what the median household income is, and just some general housing market information. Some of this we presented to you last year, including, how many units are Lewiston owned versus not Lewiston owned, how many multifamily units, how many 1 and 2 family units, and that kind of thing. And there hasn't been a significant amount of change in the housing pieces of that, but one thing that I'll draw your attention to is the median household income. It's gone up a pretty good amount in the year over year there, went up 18%. And we'll talk about that in just a moment when we get down into housing affordability. So in terms of housing conditions, we wanted to take a look at the measure of investment in housing. So the first piece there, the permit valuation, that's for residential only, and that related to the amount of funds that the valuation of the construction permits that were issued in 2022, and we're hoping to see that increase. We got that from Lewiston Planning and Code. And I should also mention that Link and other city staff were super, super helpful in getting a lot of these numbers together for us.
There is one note on that those permit valuations are for building permits. Any new structure or improvement significant enough to require a building permit, but it does not include permits for fences, driveways, an electrical permit, a plumbing permit. So that's not the limit of investment in the city. That's just the total of larger investments.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The code and violations and condemnations, we took a look at that and just took the total violations divided by the total number of units. That seemed to, we were hoping to see that trend decrease, but of course you also want people reporting when things aren't going well. So, that might also depend on the number reported and all of those kinds of pieces and what that trend is there as well. We saw a really significant shift in the lead poisoning rate, and I think probably a lot of you saw some of the news that happened around that the coverage around that. And of course, we would like to see that decrease. We are still awaiting the 2020 data for that. And, there was, I think, probably 3 or 4 years ago where a law was passed where if you are 5 or under, you had, every child 5 and under had to be tested for lead poisoning. And there was a pretty big explosion in the number of kids who tested positive because there were just more kids being tested. But we've been seeing that go down, and that's a really good thing, obviously, that we would like to see. However, we also, as we were talking about this during our last committee meeting, we were talking about how even when there is any percentage of kids with lead poisoning, those effects are long lasting and over, somebody's lifetime. And so that's important to really remember, even as we celebrate how great it is that the rate is declining. Moving on to housing affordability, the rental affordability index, the main housing is still having trouble getting responses from Lewiston around that data. So we used a national report that included Lewiston-related data, and we, as you see here, we are seeing more affordability. However, I think everybody here knows how expensive housing is, and when we look at the median household income, that has definitely increased, which is really helpful, but that still doesn't mean that people are spending the right percentage of their income on rent. So, what we would like to see is that the average renter can meet the average rent with their income and have it not be more than 30% of their income spent on rent or housing costs generally. The home affordability has, of course, gone down again. I'm sure that you've all seen how, even though it's fluctuating a little bit, the market still remains pretty unaffordable for folks. As we move toward availability, this is really obviously a challenge that is being somewhat alleviated, we hope, as we invest more in housing in Lewiston. But people can't move because everything is full. And, we would like to see that vacancy rate hold at about 5 to 8%, which would be a healthy market, meaning that people can move from rentals to homes, because what's happening, as you probably know, is that the more people that stay in the rental market because there aren't enough homes being sold, or there aren't enough homes being that are at an affordable rate for folks, they stay in the rental market, and then that keeps other folks out of it. So even people who have housing vouchers, even if there are landlords who are willing to rent to voucher holders, which there are many, there's just not the availability. And so people are having to give back their vouchers even as they get them in some cases. So the other pieces here I think are pretty self-explanatory. Of course, there's the unhoused youth in Lewiston schools, which has really jumped quite significantly. And we are hoping to see that number decrease, obviously, but as people need services and as people are struggling to make ends meet, and then there's no housing to meet them when they do have a voucher or can afford something, that's really creating some challenges. Do you want to talk about the eviction rate, because you looked into that?
Yeah. The eviction rate is, we chose to use only the court-ordered writs of possession because we felt that was the most reliable and consistent number. We didn't go with the notices to quit or those who voluntarily vacate. Mostly because it's just impossible to track. What was I supposed to say on that? I mean, obviously the desired trend is that nobody gets evicted. We're realistic enough to know it's a real world. It is going to happen, but we would like to see that trend decline. Part of the problem with the increased eviction rate is the number of evictions that are going to the final stage of a writ of possession, because, to reference a previous problem, a landlord needs someone out because they want to do repairs or they want to upgrade the unit, and the tenant has no place to go because our vacancy rate is so low, which just exacerbates other problems.
Yep, exactly. And of course, there was a period of time where, there was an eviction moratorium, and then a lot of cases backed up, and then the courts are just very full right now too. And so I think that, as you go, you might just see that number increase as people continue to push those cases. And so we are interested to see what next year's numbers look like and see what kind of trend we can take a look at there. So that is the scorecard. And if you have questions, if you have things that you want us to look into, we're happy to do so. I think after the last presentation that we did for you, you had a number of questions, and we wrote a memo back to you providing the information on that. We're happy to do that again. So happy to hear what makes sense for you.
Thank you very much for this presentation. One question that I had, so yes, we noticed that lead poisoning rates have gone down. Has there been an increase in the number of landlords or units or buildings taking advantage of the lead abatement program here in Lewiston?
Do you know the answer to that, Link?
Yeah, we have seen a significant uptick.
Do you mind coming to a microphone or heading to the podium or whatever is most convenient?
We have seen a significant uptick. We did have a change in staff. We've got a nice young man who's been working, really bringing the program back, and we've got a lot of stuff in the pipeline at this point, going through the underwriting analysis of the tenants. It can only go into income-qualified housing units, but we've got staff that are focused on that, so we've got till the end of the year to really get stuff under contract, so we do expect to spend quite a bit of money over the next 9 months.
Do we know how many units have been through the, been abated over the past year?
It's a good question, but I don't know the answer, and I can get it for you, though.
Okay, thank you. Further questions from the council? Councilor Pease.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I was looking at the medium housing income, and you jumped it up to 51,000, and yet you're telling me that the people that there are on a waiting list is almost 1,100 are on a waiting list. Is it waiting for vouchers or is it waiting for units?
For the public housing wait list, they're waiting for units.
They're waiting for units. And it's not because they can't afford them. It's because there's none.
Yes, correct.
I find it hard to believe that the income increased by $8,000 a year in Lewiston in 1 year. That's surprising. I was hoping it'd be more.
Right. Yeah, I think that I would add, though, that for a public housing wait list, you can be on a wait list and your income isn't checked until your time, to have a unit comes. And so I don't know, of course, the affordability, if people who are on the wait list can afford a unit that is offered to them, I'm not sure, but I'm guessing that if people take a look at the income guidelines based on whatever they're applying for, my hope is that they would be able to afford it or use a voucher to do so.
Okay, so this 1,100 count is 1,100 families, individuals, whatever, total. It's not programs that they have multiple applications.
That is, yeah. So if we are looking at that 1,100 number, those are either individuals or families. So that's not how many applications. If somebody has applied to Lewiston Housing and Auburn Housing, that's still counted as one family because the source here is Lewiston Housing. So if they've applied to Lewiston Housing once, they're counted here once.
Okay, so if they applied for Meadowview and then Tall Pines or Hillview, that's one application.
It's considered, yes. So anyone who has applied to Lewiston Housing for their housing, that is where that is captured. That doesn't include, people who have applied for, let's say, Hartley Block, because that's owned by the Zanton Company. So it really depends. But basically, if you're talking about Lewiston Housing owned properties, that's how many people are on that wait list.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Further comments or discussion from the council? Councilor LaChapelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do you know the percentage of housing stock that is subsidized in comparison to market rate?
That is a good question, because while we could take a look at the actual units that are subsidized, it's hard to say because there are also vouchers that are used in the private market. So that would be considered a subsidized unit if somebody is using a voucher for
But we
it.
know how many vouchers are given and how many vouchers are actually activated. so we can track that. And then you can track how many subsidized housing units that we have in the city of Lewiston. You know, Tall Pines, Hillview, the list goes on, Govo Place. That, I'd be interested to see what that percentage is there.
Okay.
And another question for Director, I think it is imperative, or how are we receiving the lead grants from the federal government? Has that slowed down, increased? Where are we at on that? I know you said you're working diligently to get some more programs out, but what's that dollar amount? Has it increased?
Yeah,
Or?
the last grant we had received was in 2019, and it was a $5.2 million grant. Right after we got it, COVID hit, so we were slow to ramp up. And then folks were like, no, I don't want to let you into it. I'm not even letting my mother come in the house, much less who are you and what do you want to know? You want all this financial information? So it was slow to start. We need to commit all those funds by the end of the year, then we have another 6-7 months to actually draw it down. So we have not applied for another grant because we still have about $3 million available.
So are you saying they've made the application process more difficult? Because I, as a former apartment owner, I've utilized the lead grant program, and it's vitally important on some of this old stock. You cannot afford to start replacing porches and windows, and these programs are just vital to start keeping these old stock buildings up and running.
I would agree, and the program itself hasn't changed. It's really the tenants' receptiveness to allowing folks to come in, to interview them, to qualify them as income eligible. So it's, the program itself has not changed. We're actually spending quite a bit of money on this lead grant. I mean, it's a great opportunity. If you've got old rotten porches that happen to have rotten, bad paint on them, you can come in. We've been engineering them and rebuilding porches to the tune of $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 just to rebuild porches on these old properties.
Easily.
Yeah,
Easily.
yeah.
So we still have about $3 million left over?
At this point, a lot of it is starting to get stuff that's in the pipeline. I can give you a more detailed when I talk to my staff, but we're hopeful that we will get most of it committed by the time we have to stop committing it, and then we'll have another. We have to commit it by the end of the year, and then let those construction contracts play out.
Okay, good. That's good. It's just vitally important, so thank you on that. The other question, the eviction ratio, yes, it's going to go higher, and that's a fictitious number. It's if anybody goes on a Tuesday or Wednesday at the court and see there's 5 pages of evictions, it is just ridiculous. And as somebody that is quite frequently in that facility at that time, yes, and the deals that are made just to try to get somebody out is ridiculous also. And you're not talking about the landlords that are actually paying tenants to leave. You owe me $2,000 here, here's another $1,000, get out. And
Are you saying that the number here is not, I'm sorry, I just had a hard time to.
It's far higher,
Far higher than
Yes.
what we have here?
yes. Yes.
This
Yes,
was
you said you're not tracking, because you're only tracking the writ of possession.
Yes,
And,
right.
but out of that writ of possession, there's probably just as many that are there and have used creative ways to get people out.
Sure.
Have you looked at, I know this is housing, have you looked at some kind of a Bill of Rights for landlords or something to that effect? Because we seem to be not you, I don't want to say you, the Housing Committee. There's a tendency to villainize a landlord as big, mean, evil people, when in fact, and oftentimes they're losing their shirts and they're trying to maintain. When you have renters go in and destroy a place. I know some states make it a crime, a Class C crime. Has there been any action to look at what we can do? Like an example, Lewiston, for the city of Lewiston, if you're evicted from one place, you cannot apply for subsidized housing for a while because you had an eviction. Is there any look from the housing authority, not housing authority, from your housing committee for some kind of, even some kind of a law, a local ordinance to start protecting when somebody goes in and trashes a place, holes in walls, painting, they just spray paint the place. And I'm sure you've seen pictures of some absolutely disgusting units. Have you looked at that at all?
We have not. Dash is one of
I-
our landlords on the committee, and I personally find him delightful, and I don't think anybody should villainize him.
Well, there is one person recently who did not go to a writ of possession, but she came very close. And yes, we understand that this number does not truly reflect the number of evictions. It is significantly higher. It's just this number is, we felt it was the most accurate year over year as to how many people get to the point of a full formal court-ordered eviction. I mean, most people will get their Fed notice, then their notice of a court date for eviction, and will find some place or become homeless or couch surf to avoid having that eviction on their record.
Dash, how
So-
many?
This is just an indication of how many people got so desperate that they actually went to court hoping that a judge would help them.
How many units do you own, Dash?
I own 12,
12 units.
which is very few in comparison to many, but
And on your committee, is there anybody that owns 100 units? What's the largest unit
I
in
think
the
that,
makeup of the committee?
I don't know how many Michael Reed owns. He was on the committee. He is no longer. I am wondering, and I'm not entirely sure, but my guess is that if we were to look into some sort of landlord bill of rights, that would probably be something that would make more sense to ask the Lewiston, the folks who represent us in Augusta, to look into. I don't know, because I know that on the committee that is the subcommittee that's working on the lodging houses, even questions around that and tenants' rights were a big question that had to be addressed by state law. And so I'm not entirely sure what we could do there, but I'd be happy to look into it.
So my last, it's more of a statement than anything else. I guess I would encourage the Housing Committee to reach out and get one or two people that do this for a living and have a bunch of housing, because it's far different than somebody having 3 units living in there and 2 units upstairs than somebody that's actually trying to make a living running 50 units, 100 units, 200 units. And we do have some local landlords that have 200-300 units here in town. Then I would encourage to try to diversify your committee to look at all angles and when addressing some of the issues that come to on a larger scale.
I believe that the makeup of our committee has to do with a mayoral appointment and then being confirmed by you all. So that would be probably a conversation to be had there.
Or did
just-
you have?
So if we're only looking for blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, and all we have on the committee is blonde-haired, blue-eyed people trying to count, you don't get the full picture. So when you're doing statistics and you're coming out, if you have nobody that's involved into that level, it's hard to get a true picture of it. I'm making that recommendation to the committee. The committee can make that recommendation to the mayor or whomever. That was just a recommendation.
Sure.
1 second, Councilor Pease. For the public's benefit, I believe the Housing Committee is established by an ordinance that details the makeup of the committee. And there is a landlord slot. I think Dash Padam, I think you filled
yes,
that slot.
I'm one of them. There
Yes.
are 2 slots.
Okay, and so there are a number of slots representing homeowners, apartment renters, apartment
Developers.
developers, et cetera, that kind of form the basis of the committee.
Somebody from a financial institution, there are a couple of, yeah.
Correct, yes, thank you for reminding me of that. Councilor Pease.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This question is for Director Jeffries. On the lead-based program, is there a dollar limit for the program?
It is $12,000, I think it's $12,200 per unit, and then we have another, I think it's $2,300 of CDBG match that goes into that, and we also require the landlord, building owner, to have some match going into that as well. But as far as the CDBG, or not CDBG, but the lead grant dollars going into it, it's $12,200 per unit.
Okay, per unit. But there are other programs that kick in with that to give them enough money to, let's say, redo their porches.
Exactly. We do match it, and we do have to get, we can exceed that. That's sort of where it starts. I think when it hits the $20,000 per unit level, we have to get special approval by the people in the lead program at HUD. But the goal is 12.2, but as we get into it, if it grows, at this point, we've got enough money. It was a double-edged sword. We were looking to do as many units as possible. Rather than saying, hey, here's 50 grand, go fix up a unit. It was, let's really try to target this, make it a reasonable amount of money. Construction costs have increased. And so at this point, we are still, 12.2 is the goal, but it does rise from that.
Okay, how about the single-family home? Are they
Single-
qualified?
If they're income qualified, yes. We have not done that many.
I know of a couple that should, and I'm just, I've been working with code enforcement to do something, so
Yeah, no,
if
please,
there's monies available, I'd like to see them get it.
please have them reach out. We'd be happy to, we'd love to, especially if they have kids at the home. That's exactly who it's targeted for. So
Okay, thank you.
I'd be happy to talk with them.
Thank you.
Further comments or questions from the council? Anything further? Well, thank you very much for serving. I'm deeply appreciative of the committee's work, and yeah, no, thank you so much for this housing scorecard. You've done so much for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening.
Oh, Jason, come on up.
We will now have a presentation on a Lowell Street Housing Project TIF proposal. If the two of you can introduce yourselves, and then please proceed.
Sure, Lincoln Jeffers, Economic and Community Development Director for the City of Lewiston, and pleased to have.
Jason Lebec, owner of Aegean Development Corporation.
And this is a project we have been working on for quite some time. Jason came to me with a vision, saying, look, I've got some real estate over between the hospital and the former Peck's department store. I own this parking garage. We've got a lot of real estate there, and it's vacant. And it could be of better use than parking. We've got enough parking there. It's currently not being used, so let's see if we can repurpose that area. And when did we start on this, Jason?
June of last year.
June of last year. So this is about a year in play. Quite a bit of work has gone into it. So let me lay out. This is the, oh, I'm surprised. Oh, this map, you can see, well, we'll get to it on the map. This is the vision that the red brick building there is what Jason's looking to do for the first phase. It would be 150 units. It's about a $32 million project. There'll be commercial uses at the street level. The upper floors will be a total of 150 units. 106 of those will be studio units. There'll be 22 one-bedroom, 22 two-bedroom units. You've got a mix of club rooms, fitness. I know we've had various discussions. Really looking to bring some energy to that area of the city. Lowell Street is sort of a sleepy neighborhood. People pass through it, but there really has not been much activity. And his vision has really been to create a neighborhood there. A partner in that effort. This gives you a sense of what the upper floors will look like breaking out. There's quite a bit of studios, with the corners being a mix of other bedroom types. Partner is a gentleman named Joe Ministo, who owns the DHS building, and there's a large parking lot behind that. Historically, the DHS has not really wanted to give up any of their parking. With the parking available in the parking garage, Jason has worked everybody to come to terms where the DHS employees are more willing to park in the garage, which frees up some of that land that'll allow it to be redeveloped for housing as well. So you're going to have two buildings side by side. That very first slide showed two buildings of scale. This one is not as well defined as building one, which is what Jason has been working on. This one is currently in process. The unit count could be anywhere from 125 up to 200 units.
Today, 180.
180, hot off the presses.
Hot off the presses.
180 is what they're looking at. I have yet to see the pro forma and all the financials on that. I suspect they'll be very similar to the pro forma that I reviewed from Jason's project, but that will be a second phase. Some of the other issues that need to happen here and what they're looking for partnership from the city, this gives you a sense. This is standing. Basically, I think I've got my back to I'm sorry?
Back to the Dempsey Center, looking down Lowell to the south.
Okay, and I was thinking it was the medical school on my left, but exactly. We're looking, so you can see there's a lot of utilities overhead in this area. That parking lot on the far side of the stop sign is right by the river. That's where building one will go. Another concept, as you can see, the street's pretty tired. We did do some improvements coming from Lowell, coming down one block. But this still needs to be redone, and as part of that effort, if we're taking these utilities, putting them underground, the thought was, how can we improve it, really make this a living street, where you've got a building on the north side and the south side of the street, and make it a place that's more, not just dedicated to cars, but it's a place where people would want to be, walk, hang out. I know, at risk of setting off some of the counselors with those fond memories of playing wiffle ball in the street or frisbee, I think we all did that. So let's create a place, something like that. As structuring this TIF, we are talking about doing an omnibus TIF district, and that means we are going to create a district, which is a 30-year term, and within that district, we can do individual TIFs with each building owner, each person who says, I need assistance. The council, I'll do the analysis. I'll talk with the council about it and say, here's what we find. What do you think? We've had those discussions in executive session with building one. It was a 20-year TIF. And as we looked at the analysis, it was a pretty snug rate of return to investors in that project. It was less than 10% in the first year. It was our first 10 years, really. It was between 6 and 9% for years 1 through 9. So it made sense to do a 65% tax reimbursement to the developer to help make the project a reality. But after the first 10 years, the project was going to start generating sufficient revenues. And as we had the conversation, Jason was willing to say, okay, let's knock it back 5% per year for years 11 through 20. So that would be the first development program, and it would be for 20 years. The second development program, I expect to be talking to you within a couple of months. Hearing it's now 180 units. JLM Enterprises is the owner of the real estate. That one needs to mature a little bit, but I believe that the TIF will likely very much mirror this one. Some details may change, but that's sort of the expectation at this point. As we talked about undergrounding utilities, that is not an inexpensive thing to do. Doing the work, Jason's made some contact with his site engineer with Goral Palmer, has done other undergrounding of utilities, and costs can be upwards of $1,100 per linear foot to do it. We had gone from 1,000 feet from Chapel Street all the way up to Lowell. At this point, we're just going up from Chapel up to Bate Street, which is about 500 feet. Best ballpark cost estimate with no full-on analysis is it's going to be around $600,000, more or less. And the thought, the agreement that we've been talking about is the city would pay 50% of the cost of both the study and of the improvements needed. And then Jason's project, Aegean, would pay 25% of that project cost. And then the second developer would pay the other 25%. And the Winoof, we have not yet fully fleshed that out. Some of the challenges with that is, as much as I'd like to think we can just shut down the street or have it have very little traffic as you're leaving the parking garage. To make a left and head towards Augusta, you would have to take a left out of the parking garage that Jason owns, take a left on Chapel, take a right on Lowell, and then take a right on Middle Street to get to the lights so you can get onto Main Street and out. So we've got to figure out how we can, there's going to be 2 times a day where there's a fair amount of traffic there as people are coming and going to work or leaving home on their way to work. So it's how do we achieve both, where it's a place where people want to be, but it doesn't feel like a highway, and it's no man's land for the bulk of the time. This shows the TIF district, where the 2.98 is where Building 1 will be. Across the other side of Lowell Street is where Building 2 will be. And then the upper end of that area, unfortunately this didn't show. The end going up Middle Street is also, that's a 3rd phase that Jason owns that real estate, and the hospital owns some of that, so those are some negotiations. So again, really we're creating the district. Looks like you've got a question, Counselor.
No.
Okay, no, so we're creating this district so it's large enough so we don't have to keep coming back. We can simply create the district, and then as each development program comes forward, the need for it, we can analyze it and take action. This next slide really lays out how the financials on this work. This is the 20-year TIF. The original assessed valuation is the current AV. That was all the real estate within that district, which if councils remember, that's a larger number than we saw in the executive sessions. That's because we grew the size of the TIF district from that originally just building 1 site to a larger district. So the taxes being generated by that are a little over $16,000. The new assessed valuation is $18.9 million, and that's based on, even though Jason will be investing $32 million, the city assessor analyzed the numbers, and based on the income approach, that's where he placed the assessed valuation. The CAV is captured assessed valuation, that's the 18.9 minus the original. New taxes generated will be $551,000, with 65% going back to the developer. That's $358,210 for the first 10 years, and then it starts diminishing in years 11 through 20. I did run a serial debt template for $600,000, and whether all of that needs to be spent on undergrounding the utilities, some of that might need to be spent on the Winoof. That number is a little bit fungible. I mean, we're trying to figure it out. We haven't done all the analysis needed, but at least for modeling this, that made sense. And then so we end up with, as far as general fund revenues to the city, there'll be nearly 5.4 million over the course of the 20 years. The amount going back to the developer will include 5.6 million, but the city's paying $765,000 in debt, and we still get the original taxes of $161,175. So this is pretty equitable. We'll end up with 150 more market rate units with this project. The city will see a significant increase in its tax revenues. The other benefit of tax increment financing is you get what's called the sheltering effect, when you don't have to count the new value associated with that city debt and the amount going back to the developer. I did the math earlier today where you take those two and there's a captured assessed value associated with that, and that does not get added to the tax base. So this is not new tax revenue. This is money that if it just went on the tax rolls at full value, that you would lose these revenues. So it helps maintain it helps hold the amount you pay in county taxes flat, helps retain the amount of revenue sharing you receive, and the amount in state aid for education you'll receive. This is again done by each year. It's not inconsequential. The total tax shift value is a little over 2.4 million over the term of the 20 years. And now, the other caveat I should put in here is I used today's mill rate of 0.3. I didn't change it over the course of that. The reality is the TIF, the mill rate will likely change over 20 years, and there's a possibility that the assessed valuation will also change over the 20 years. But the goal today was really just to give you a model of how this could all work. We need to really, we've got the legal documents are in play at this point. They're sitting with Jason's attorneys, so we need to finalize that. I'll continue working with JLM, who is the owner of DHS, to start dialing that in, but just wanted to put this out there for the council, and whatever questions you may have.
Thank you. Councilor Jelinas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly in support of any additional housing we can bring into this community. I know that, you know, when I'm recruiting new employees and trying to get people to move from away, that has been consistently an issue. So, Jason, I understand that the 150 units in Building 1 are all market rate.
Yes.
Yeah. And is the intent for Building 2, the 180 units, also market rate?
Yes.
Okay.
And Building 3, which Building 3 right now, it's on middle, would be 90 units.
Okay.
So combined, it'd all be market rate.
Okay. 2 more quick questions. You talked about commercial activity, commercial business activity at the at the ground level. What's your vision for that? Like, can you give me an example of what you're thinking, what you're envisioning for that?
With the amount of units that we're building over the course of time, plus the existing workforce and the neighborhood that kind of bisects the Sunnyside neighborhood,
Yep.
definitely it's going to be a third-party eatery, cafe, coffee house, restaurant.
Okay.
You'll have a captive audience right there. So we think that will be the most likely avenue for retail/commercial leasing.
Okay, good, that sounds great. Final question, so the city portion of the underground utilities, 300,000, I think you said 50% of 600,000. But did I hear you correctly say that there's really been no full-on analysis done? In other words, that's just like a ballpark figure. So when we think about this, I mean, that could be like really off. I mean, because I've read a little bit about this whole underground utility thing, and it's pretty, that's a lot. So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about that?
You're right, it is a lot. And everybody I talked to, that was what they said. All the engineers says, wow, that's expensive. The 1,100 I used was really based on a real-world experience. It's not, it was a couple of years ago, and so we did inflate it a little bit from the number given. To really dial it in, a study needs to occur. It's about a $50,000 study, and it's a company out of Augusta that we're trying to connect with.
But the intent is to proceed with that.
Yeah, please do.
And I don't even think I really talked to Link about this yet. Last week I had a meeting with Goral Palmer and then 5 engineers from Central Maine Power. And they said the exact same thing. Basically, we don't like to do this. But it's necessary. You can't have power lines within 2 feet of a building. It just doesn't work. But the cost, that's exactly what they quoted us, around $1,000 a square foot, or linear foot, excuse me. And they, I think, are going to do the study for free, pro bono. Don't quote me on that, but they're like, let's do some math, and they're going to work it with Goral Palmer, so there'll be a cost incurred on my end on that. But I think they're going to go ahead and do the work, at least the initial study for the target area.
That's great. Good.
Thank you.
Councilor Pease.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I like the idea of the project. And I like your explanation as far as the study is concerned and what it's going to cost for the infrastructure. My other thing is, the first building, that's going to be diagonally across from 29 Lowell, where the medical offices are.
Yes.
So isn't there a little brick building that sits right on that corner?
No.
Oh, it's gone already. It's been so long since I've been down there.
Yeah, it's not there.
There's no building.
Yeah, I think in the building that was on the backside of the DHS parking lot. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what
There used
brick
to be
building
one
you're
there.
thinking of. Yeah, I mean, there've been a couple buildings demolished in that neighborhood over the last decade, so.
Yeah. Well, the reason I ask that is because I know that one of the abutters, it used to belong, I don't know if it belongs to him anymore, but it was a Tucson. Tucson redeveloped a building on that corner. 6 unit, 4 or 6 unit. And it's right adjacent. I didn't know if that was going to be part of this or,
No, that's north. That's closer to Central Maine Medical Center and Hammond Street.
Yeah.
That building. It's closer to Hammond.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
closer.
not in this district.
Okay, just a question. Thank you.
Councilor LaChapelle.
Thank you. Mr. Levesque, what's our timeline looking at for construction? In the perfect world, everything goes as planned.
As of today, in the perfect world, and for Building 1, groundbreaking in 2024, with an 18-month completion date. Probably a 3 to 4 month stagger for Building 2, and again for Building 3. So you probably see completion by 2026.
Full-on completion.
Full-on completion of Building 1, probably 3 to 5 months after Building 2, and again 3 to 5 months after Building 3. So
Awesome.
2026 or early 2027
Excellent.
in the entire first 3 buildings.
Okay. Director Jeffers, have we looked into, and maybe this is a question for administration also, our water and sewer in that area? How old is that? Is it aged? Is that all going to have to be replaced also? Now, we're going to bring in a lot of units that we're looking at sewage that has been sitting there for 150 years.
As we first started talking about this, I spoke with Kevin Gagne multiple times, saying, do we have the capacity to make this work? And we do have the capacity. Speaking with Jeff Boley last night at the Finance Committee meeting afterwards, I was saying, Jeff, how are we doing with the WNUF and undergrounding utilities? And he informed me that we're actually going to be doing I'm not sure if it's a water or sewer upgrade in Middle Street in the coming year. So we are making investments in that area. With that, I've expended my knowledge. I'll turn to the city administrator to see if she knows more than I do, which I know she does, so.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but regarding this, we can definitely, as we get closer to finalizing all the documents, we will be looping in everybody to make sure there's no surprises.
So we can tear up the street one time,
That would be the goal.
not tear it up 5 times. There are going to be a lot of heavy trucks coming in and out, and if it means we'll block the street for a month so you can actually rip it up, and I find it hard to believe that we're going to put 300 new units and we're going to utilize water mains that are 100 years old and sewer lane. I'm just more concerned on after they're in full use that we have to tear it up to replace it. So now might be the time just to look at, they're only 75 years old, so what? Let's just put new ones in there so we don't have to mess with it. So that's just a concern, and hopefully be looked at as a proactive approach instead of a reactive approach. So thank you on that. Jason, I love the idea of just moving in that area. I like the idea of the planting of the trees, the promenade, that whole, I can really envision that tying into our master plan. We're talking about having a walkway connecting right basically to that land, going right down to the Veterans Park, over to Samard Payne, actually all the way down to Cedar Street. So that would, I can just see residents from the new Picker House,
Continental Mill.
kind of taking a jog all the way up to there, and just vice versa. And maybe in time, if it's conducive, putting something, well, they can go over the bridge into Auburn from the Samar Payne Park, from the railroad, the Jenkins Bridge. So great visionary. Thank you very much. It's my support on the project is based on shovels in the ground. I've heard it too many times. We've gone to too many groups that have these great visions, is shovel in the ground. I'm not willing to vote on repairing anything until we have some permits. When we have permits, 100%, so 100% behind it. I would just encourage development. Thank you.
This is an exciting project. As Councilor LaChapelle just said, we have the Riverfront Island Master Plan going, and we kind of, have the housing development at Continental Mill on one end. On the other end, we will have this, and it will really, kind of transform this part of town. I'm looking forward to it. Further comments and discussion from the council? Councilor Clement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm excited to hear about the project. I was also had a brief conversation with Jason in the hallway before we started tonight. And 2024, the earlier in 2024 we get a shovel in the ground, the better off everyone's going to feel about this. I mean, we've been brought to the edge of the cliff so many times, and nobody's been there to push us over. So, you know, we're looking forward for that big push. I certainly hope this is it. I wish you the best of luck in getting it there, because I think it'll be a great thing.
Well, just to give you a little bit of kind of warm and fuzzy on that one. I mean, so far up to date, we're looking at, just to get to tonight, close to $100,000 in capital investment. So I share that excitement and that sense of urgency. This isn't playing with anyone else's money. This is my own. And obviously Joe's in a similar position. So there is, you know, a sense of urgency to recoup that initial capital investment just to get to tonight, let alone planning board in August. So.
Well, we've been promised warm and fuzzies before, but they've just never come to fruition. That's been the problem.
And I will be honest, there's two variables that are out of our control. One is finance. I mean, interest rates. One of the reasons that we're here tonight is because interest rates went from, during the inception of this, 4.75 to approximately 6.5. Secondarily, whereas you could get capital expenditures from a bank of 85 to even 90% loan-to-value ratio, that's dropped to 65 to 73% roughly. So the financial burden has definitely been exacerbated. The second is obviously the amount of construction that's going on and the competition within a very finite amount of resources, general contractors. As we saw earlier tonight, you have probably a good percentage of the overall general contractors in the state of Maine working on housing projects over the next 12 to 24 months. So there's competition there as well.
Wish you luck with the project.
Thanks.
It's hard to find a plumber. Counselor Scott.
I just wanted to say that I'm excited about this, too. I think this is going to make a significant change to the Sunnyside neighborhood area. It's going to make a significant change in that area that we've needed for a long time. We've had a lot of discussion about the need for housing in Lewiston, and, you know, we've had a lot of new projects coming forward, but market rate housing is a totally different aspect to that, and that's something that's been needed just as well as the other housing that we're putting forward. So I'm happy to see this going.
And if I could, just to follow up, and if it's a dialogue, I want to give you some statistics that would help you on your previous workshop item tonight that I think kind of dovetails. I commissioned a private market analysis or residential market analysis. I shared this in confidence with Link. It was very expensive, but it's worth every single penny. One of the key points in that, and we can show you that, or Link can show you that in executive session at some other point, but I'll share this statistic. There's currently 1,700 households within the primary market area, which is Androscoggin County, New Gloucester, and Oxford, the town of Oxford, that are under-rented right now. In other words, they're spending less than 20% of their income on rent because there's nothing else available. Based upon, you know, national analytics, 450 of those individuals would move into market rate rents that we're proposing if given the chance, if it's built. That would open up 450 market rate or other units of lower costs throughout the area. Based upon some real world analytics, 50% of the rents will be going to people out of this community. So when you factor that in, and that's people moving from the greater Portland marketplace, or we call it the secondary market area. So you're looking at around opening up 200 or so units in the Lewiston Auburn area, the metro area, if you would, for other people to move into, which will help increase that vacancy rates, if you would.
Yeah.
So.
Counselor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I want to echo everybody's satisfaction with a project like this. I don't think you could put it in a better spot as far as the connections. You've got buses there, you've got the downtown. A lot of people aren't taking into account the multiplier effect that this will do, because it'll draw other businesses, it'll make other businesses more profitable, more businesses moving to that area, so it's just a snowball effect. And you took my thunder on what you said, but that's one of the things that people don't realize. I know they criticized a lot of the construction in Auburn as far as the cost of the units to rent. Then they don't realize that people, like you said, will move up and open up units at a lesser rate. So it does help with the housing for the people that are of lesser means, by opening up those as they move up into a nicer, more expensive units like you have. So I think it's a win-win for everybody, and I'm anxiously waiting for the groundbreaking. Thank you.
Say it again.
If the council could please silence their cell phones. Yeah. Anything further, Councilor McCarthy? Yeah. Okay, further questions or comments from the council? Director Jeffers, Mr. Levesque? We're good?
No, this is great. Thank you for the opportunity tonight. We will continue to dial in the legal documents. We expect to be back to you probably in July to get formal approval on this. Jason's been talking with the folks up in code to get it through planning board as well.
We've already,
So,
and just so you know, there's no variances that are needed. This is all within your Centerville building code. It might be the easiest planning board approval process ever.
Excellent. You two have a wonderful evening.
I was going to say, you said knock on wood. That's what I was thinking too. Knock on wood.
These meetings are being recorded. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you. Welcome, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Looks like we'll be having a discussion regarding proposed amendments to the business license ordinance as it pertains to licensing of homeless shelters.
Yes, so we are bringing forth for your
For
discussion.
the public's benefit, this is our Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, Kathy Monteo, City Clerk for Lewiston. We are bringing forth for your discussion and consideration this evening what we're viewing as some housekeeping changes to the updated shelter ordinance, as well as some requests from the shelter applicants. As you know, we have 6 shelters in the city of Lewiston, and as we are working together to implement the new revised changes as approved by the council, some items have come up. And if you look at your memo, we're certainly happy to discuss any of the items, but I just sort of wanted to point out that in the memo, hopefully a lot of them are fairly self-explanatory and straightforward. The first one is definitions. We just need to clean up the conflicting language in the ordinance. We have 2 different definitions for homeless shelter in there. That was an oversight. So we're recommending just to remove the older definition and go with a newer definition. Number 2, expiration date. It was actually an oversight that the expiration date was actually never incorporated into the new ordinance language. We've always had an expiration date of the end of February for all housing-related licensing, lodging homes, boarding houses, and whatnot. So it was an oversight by staff, so we'd just like to actually codify that in there, that the expiration date for the annual licenses will be the end of February, and that will keep it in sync with the other housing-related type licenses. I'm going to skip background checks just for the moment, because we'll go back to that. Number 4, 12 copies of the application. Again, we're viewing that just as a housekeeping change. The ordinance requires the applicant, whether they're an original first-time applicant or a renewal applicant, to give us 12 paper copies. Our intent was only to have them provide 12 paper copies because the first-time one goes to the city council as opposed to staff making reams of photocopies. We wanted that to be the responsibility of the applicant for the first time. Renewal applications are done on a staff level only, so we don't need to have 12 copies. So that's just, again, some housekeeping changes. Number 5 would be, number 5 and 7 are sort of together regarding putting in some language to have the information be confidential for shelters that service domestic violence survivors and other similar survivors. They ask that their shelter address be confidential, given obvious reasons for the protection and safety of their guests, and also to not have to report out in the demographics the last address for their guests, because that may tip the hand regarding where they came from and their identity. And then number 6, the ordinance just uses the term residence regarding the demographics report, and that created some questions. Does it need to be street name and house number where their last residence was before they moved into the shelter? Is town only? And staff really feels we don't really need to know the street number and where they were residing previously, because the purpose of the demographics is just to get a picture of, are they Lewiston-based folks? Did they come here from Massachusetts or Washington County? Where did they come from? So we're recommending that the change just be for town and state, just to give us a picture of where these folks came from before they were guests in shelters. So we view all of those as housekeeping related and/or the requests from the applicants. So I'm happy to answer any questions on those if you have any. The biggest sort of discussion point we wanted to have with you is number 3 regarding background checks. So if it's okay, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to entertain questions on everything else minus background checks, and we can save that conversation as the next one.
Do we have questions on every, there we go. Councilor Clement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not so much a question, but a suggestion. If we're going to be amending the ordinance when it comes to 22-453.
Councilor, do you mind using the microphone?
Oh, sorry about that. I moved it out of the way because I kept bumping it. Sorry about that. 22-453 under the application for homeless shelters. Number 8, item I. I would make a suggestion that we amend or add to that particular section requiring something to the effect of written documentation of the applicant's financial ability to meet all standards and requirements of the article. I have this in written form for you also, Kathy. Financial ability to meet all standards and requirements of the article for the period of intended operation, or proof of an escrow account with sufficient resources to ensure same. All I'm looking for is fiscal responsibility up front with the application. That seemed to be a sticking point recently, and I think we need to define that. Hopefully my colleagues will agree that we would like to see that they have the ability to put forth what they're claiming.
Sure. And Councilor, if I could ask a clarification, would you want that to be applicable to just the first time applicant or all renewal applications as well?
My concern here is that if something goes bad, I mean, they'll be looking to the city to fund the operation. And that's what I'm trying to get around. I don't want to see the city get into the business of funding shelters. I'm not sure on the, I hadn't given any thought about the renewal at all, certainly for the initial, but worded the way I have it, they would have to provide proof of fiscal responsibility for the intended period of operation. So if they're going to be there for 10 years, they should be able to show us, yeah, we have a funding source that will last that long,
Okay.
whatever the case may be.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Pease, did you have your hand up earlier?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if it's something that we can add to it. I don't know if it's legal or not. But we have a hard time having a count of how many homeless people that are actually here in Lewiston, that have been here in Lewiston for a number of times. I understand what you're saying about you don't need to know the street they were on or the number or any of that. But where they came from, how long they've been in Lewiston, how long they've been homeless. Is there any way we can get some information that says, I know they're going to have, for the most part, they'll have some type of disabilities, whether it be drug, alcohol, or physical. Are they capable of working? Is there any way we can get some of that information, what they've done for work?
Sure. We do ask some of those questions in the demographics section on renewal applications. Of course, first-time applicants don't have that information to present for their tenants, but for demographics on an annual basis, when they submit their renewal, we are asking them to submit with their license renewal the number of guests they've served over the past year, their age range, their family status, their employment status, their last known place of residence, and then the rate of success in transitioning them from the homeless shelter to a self-sufficiency format and placement in permanent housing, whatever that may look like. So if the council would like to expand that criteria that we ask for in demographics, we're happy to incorporate that into the ordinance as the council would see fit.
Well, I don't know about the other councilors, but I'd like to have some of that information in there that we can refer to later on. You open up a homeless shelter and you say, we got 1,000 people that are homeless in Lewiston. Well, out of those 1,000, how many are from Lewiston? How many are from Portland? How many from Lisbon? How many from wherever? If we have some type of account or start to have some kind of account, it would be helpful.
Right, and that, I think, is going to be captured in the ordinance already when, in the demographics report, when they ask their guests upon intake, where was their last known place of residence? And that will give us the picture of, was it Portland, was it Lewiston, or whatnot? But of course, Counselor, they're only going to have the demographics on their guests that are at the shelter. That doesn't mean the other folks who are residing in the city but not in a shelter. But I believe there's an agency that does conduct an annual homeless survey, and so they may have some of that information already.
Yes, but they use the state's standards for figuring it all out. So I don't think that gives us a true number.
Okay.
My thing too is, can they work? Are they able to work? I mean, I don't know if that's information we can get, but I'm sure there's so much unemployment in the area, and there's so many signs up everywhere that saying, help wanted, help wanted. Maybe some of these people can get these jobs, but if we don't have anything to go by, we can't even suggest it. And the other thing I'd like to see is if we could get some businesses in the area that wouldn't mind helping by hiring somebody that's homeless or whatever. Right? Thank you.
Great, thank you, Counselor.
So I just want to take a moment here. So, as these changes, and I realize we haven't talked about background checks yet, but these changes that are suggested are, as you mentioned, Madam Clerk, housekeeping and just kind of, common sense in nature. I'm concerned that if we start materially adjusting the ordinance, I realize that the shelter committee is no longer, they closed, disbanded. But many of those individuals serve on the housing committee. And if, I have concerns about the income verification, for instance, are we requiring that from any other business licensure in the city?
We are not to my recollection, no. Although I will say, in talking with Director Hediger, that it is a requirement for some projects that go before the planning board.
Okay.
So that would be through code enforcement, but none of our business licensing asks for verification regarding financial ability and capacity to run their business.
Right. And then, if there's increased, if the council desires increased reporting requirements, I think if we're going to be, kind of revisiting more than just what's presented here, I think we need some feedback from housing and shelter advocates and professionals.
Sure, and I will say that when the agenda was posted, we did send the link to all of the 6 shelters within the city to offer them an opportunity to review the memo, make sure that we captured their requested changes in there. So they were all aware about tonight's meeting, and we'll certainly keep them updated. If we move forward to the July 18th meeting for first passage, we'll certainly keep them in the loop regarding their opportunity to come and speak under public comment.
Okay. Yes, and I realize that the shelters knew about this posted packet, but, I'm talking about the suggestions we've had this evening. Thank you. Councilor Scott?
Thank you. So I guess I would want to see more input on what the suggestions are, but I don't think that it's necessarily, I don't think that we need to put a new shelter committee together or something to that effect. I think that we've already had a lot of information that we could use to work towards what's happening. I guess one of the things that I wanted to mention was performance standards for shelters. We have performance standards and licensures for, like a bar. We'll say there's so many visits by a police department, or they had so many violations. We have those things in place in some of our other licensing for other facilities. Am I correct? Is there anything like that at all?
The one that comes to mind is the facility out at the fairgrounds.
Oh, the outpatient addiction clinic.
Yes,
Yeah.
that had a
Methadone
series
clinic.
of,
Yes, that's right. And so what I'm thinking is, so I am going to go back to the emergency shelter, and I understand that was an emergency warming shelter, But there's no provision in place if there's a significant amount of complaints from neighbors, or a significant amount of police presence that's needed, or a significant amount of, even if there's complaints by the homeless folks that are there, saying that there are some discrepancies happening, you know what I mean, and they're being discriminated against by the shelter. There is nothing in place to navigate any of those issues without having some maybe performance standards in place that say that this shelter should, this is, you know, we really want to make sure, ensure not only that the people that are there are safe, but the neighbors and where it's located it's just working good. Does that make sense?
My recollection with that, the standards that were established for that one facility, they had to report back after the first year, and I think they actually did 2 report outs, and then at that point, because there were no issues,
They're
it
good to
became
move
a
forward.
normal renewal process.
And I would be good with that, something like that too, but just so that we have something to look at it through the beginning, because with something new, there's always something that, you know, even with the emergency shelters, we did not have a chance to, right, how is that reporting done to ensure that we're fixing it in the future, I guess is what I want to make sure, and it's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Thank you, Councilor Scott. And just to be clear, I was not advocating for another shelter committee, but I just think we need additional input and perspective from current shelters and shelter professionals. Councilor LaChapelle?
Mr. Mayor, I guess we've beaten this horse to death for over a year. So question to staff, if we make these recommendations, is this going to be a agenda item that the public has an opportunity to speak on? So that will be open to the general public also. So it's not going to be a consented. Okay. So I am totally fine putting this on the agenda and having this conversation. If anybody wants to come, they have a right to come. And as far as income standards, I personally have had to not only show an income standard, get letters from the bank. I've actually had to give the city a large chunk of money for them to hold on before I can move forward on some stuff. So this is a very common, this is not something that's new and focusing just on a shelter. So that's the SOP, so there's not a problem there. So I think we move forward. We're not trying to fast track anything, but we just put it as an agenda item. And if somebody wants to come and address some of the individual topics, it's open to the public. Thank you.
Councilor LaChapelle. And this is just a workshop, so this would be on the agenda, and this would require 2 hearings, correct? Yes. Okay. Councilor Clement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Councilor Scott's point, I believe that what I suggested is part of the performance standard. I know that we don't typically do this for businesses. However, in the past year, Mr. Mayor, I think you'll recall we had a business approach the city and say they just weren't making it. But if we would provide everything for them, move them and start them up and do everything, they would open up again. And I believe the comment from the mayor's chair on that was no way, or words to that effect. But I think in this instance, businesses don't typically come to us. That's the first time I've seen that happen. But I don't think that a shelter would be anywhere near as unlikely to come and say, oh, we're running into problems fiscally. And that scares me. I mean, I look at the city of Portland, what's happening in the city of Portland, and there's some scary things going on down there when it comes to the amount of money for some of these situations that are arising. I just don't want to see us get caught up in that. I think if they can show us that they have the ability to do what they say they want to do, more than happy to help them out. But don't come say you have the ability and then come back next month and say, well, we didn't figure on this. You know, we forgot we had to buy power and pay for water and sewer and all those things. So all I'm asking for is just some kind of, I don't know, it could be an escrow account, it could be a letter of credit, I suppose. Let the legal people figure that out, but let us see something that says you can meet what it is you want to do. I don't think that's unreasonable at all. And if we present it to this, anything we do to this is an ordinance, so it's going to require an amendment to the ordinance, will require 2 readings and a 30-day enactment period. So it gives us plenty of time to discuss it. I thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Pease, did you want to add something?
Yes, thank you. As referring to what Councilor Scott said, years ago, Lisbon Street was located with a numerous amount of bars and clubs and all that, and they were monitored. If you had too many police calls, when your license came up, that was a big issue. If you can't control what's going on in their facilities, you're not going to get a license. And that's the same thing with the fire department. If you go there several times for false alarms and everything, hey, somebody's got to pay for it.
Right, and what we do have, counselor, provisions on the books is that before a license for a homeless shelter can be issued, whether it's a first-time license or specifically a renewal, before the staff will issue it, we need to have positive recommendations from police, fire, and code. And that's right in our city policy manual, the adopted manual by the city council. What it doesn't have, to get back to Councilor Scott's point, is a set of specific criteria. I mean, the police chief may say, I'm recommending that it's not renewed because of the number of calls, but there's not a trigger like 50 calls a month, or there's not a set number like that. That's a certain performance standard. It's really just the recommendation from the three departments based upon the volume or not that's there, the severity of the calls or not that's there, but there's not a strict criteria that's measurable. So many calls, so many whatever's, right. So we can certainly look into that, see if other communities have something like that that we may be able to borrow and emulate.
Further comments from the council? I think we're now up to background checks.
Yes, so background check. So within the current language of the ordinance, there is a definition of a classification called controlling person. And in the ordinance definition, that means the executive director and also every single member of the board of directors for that particular shelter regarding the oversight. The current ordinance requires that the city conduct a background check on the executive director and every single member of the board of directors. So you can see the memos in your agenda packet that some of the shelters have asked if they could have a waiver of that aspect, feeling that members of the board of directors do not do direct involvement with the guests on a regular basis, are not in there on a day-to-day basis overseeing the operations of the day-to-day operations of the shelter. They're certainly setting policy, looking at the financial aspect and whatnot, but because a background check costs the city $21 per person when we go through the main State Bureau of Investigation, which is how we do all of our background checks for liquor licensing or whatever. If they have a large board of directors, that could be costly for the shelter. And because the members of the board of directors are not hands-on daily interacting with the guests, the question was, is it really necessary for the city to be conducting an annual background check on the board of directors? We don't do that for any other licensing. Also, the other concern was members of the board of directors could change as their terms come up during the license year. Would they have to then give us the name of every new member of the board of directors? Are they going to forget? So we wanted to bring that to council just to ask your thoughts, if you'd like to keep it in there or if you'd like to have that removed specifically for the board of directors, keeping in mind that the requirement will still remain in the ordinance, that the shelter has a policy established, adopted by their board of directors and on their books, that every employee of the shelter and every volunteer at the shelter will conduct their background check. So for example, if a member of their board of directors goes in the third Saturday of every month to help serve dinner, they're viewed as a volunteer, so then the shelter would be running the background check on their volunteer, but not the city at a cost of $21. So we wanted to bring that forward to you because just about every shelter of the 6 shelters asked to have that please looked at and waived.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. In hindsight, this really seems like overkill, and so I'd be amenable to changing that. Councilor Jelinas.
Thanks. I would agree with that. I mean, I think that that's not, if you think about other social service agencies around the community, a lot of times, you know, it definitely is providers, directors and service providers that are being background checked, but not the board of directors. Yeah. However, that example that you gave, Madam Clerk, is a good one in that sometimes, board members will come in and do that level, and at that point, that's when it changes
Right.
and becomes their responsibility, not the
Yes.
city's. So I
Yes.
appreciate that.
Yes, thank you.
Councilor Pease.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have a problem if they don't want to duplicate everything, because if they're already doing background checks for their staff, I just think that the city should have a copy of that background check that they've just performed, when it was performed, just so we have an idea.
Would you be looking, Counselor, for a copy of the background check of every employee and every volunteer that every shelter has?
Well, they have them. I don't see why they couldn't.
Mr. Mayor,
And Deputy Administrator O'Malley.
in order for those organizations to run a background check, Councilor Pease, they have to sign, the individual has to sign a release, and it's release directed to that organization. So they can't then take it and hand it out to everybody. So I think there'd be some conflict of, if we tried to get copies of those from the agencies. If they have the policy in place saying they will run the background check, I think we have to rely on that. I don't think, right, they would keep it on file. We can't get copies of the background checks. That's why we would have to run the individual background checks.
Okay. I just thought it was a good idea that we have information on hand. Thank you.
Councilor Clement.
Just a thought that pops into mind, could we perform the same basic task by seeking an attestation that they have done all the required background checks?
We probably could. It is a requirement of the ordinance that they have a policy, and they have to submit a copy of that policy with their application.
Okay.
So we are seeing that they have a written policy that they will do that. We don't have proof that they're doing it, but they do have a board-adopted policy that it is required as part of their shelter operations.
Then maybe we could meet them halfway, not require them to do the checks, but just give us something in writing saying that we have done these.
They have done them?
That's reasonable, I think. Just that this is the policeman in me coming forward, but so many times people associated with persons that might be receiving services in places like this have motives that aren't entirely pure. And I think anything we can do to avoid not only embarrassment, but other things in the future would be to our benefit. To say, yeah, we do all these checks right here. And then we've got it in writing, and if they don't do it, you have something to fall back on.
Sure. Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Administrator Hunter, did you have something?
Just to clarify, when you're saying that it's a good thing to change, are we talking just to do the executive director, or the executive director and the chair of the board? Just the executive director? I just want to clarify, because that tended to be the second piece. Okay, thank you.
Further comments or questions from the council? Madam Clerk, did you have anything else for us, or any questions about what you've heard this evening?
We're all set. Thank you, sir.
Excellent, thank you so much. And that concludes the workshops, and we're going to be moving into our special meeting. We will now be conducting a special meeting, and we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Deputy Administrator O'Malley, could you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Agenda item number 1.
Item number 1, public hearing for approval of an outdoor music event for the A Hand Up and R-Hom Recovery Kickoff Barbecue
Requested action to conduct a public hearing on an application for A Hand Up and R-Ham for an outdoor music event to be held at Samard Payne Park on July 8th, and to authorize a permit for an outdoor entertainment event as required by the City Code of Ordinances, Chapter 10, Article 1, Section 10-3, to the applicant for the outdoor music event, contingent upon positive recommendations from the Police Department, Fire Department, Code Land Use Officer, and Code Health Officer regarding compliance with all regulations and compliance with all city ordinances.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Counselor Jelinas?
Second.
Second by Counselor McCarthy. Discussion? Counselor Jelinas?
Thank you. I just want to say that I'm very familiar with these organizations, the work that they've been doing in the community. And, you know, when we met over that year period as a mayoral ad hoc committee on substance misuse and recovery, one of the major needs that surfaced as a result of the work that was done was the fact that we really needed to do more educational types of events. We needed to do more events in public. I mean, really moving away from anonymous stuff and recovering out loud. And these organizations are really committed to that work. You know, both of these entities have been involved in the annual Rally for Recovery that the Lewiston Area Public Health Committee has done and continues to do. And so I personally applaud this group for coming forward and making this request and would encourage my colleagues to support it as well.
Yes, I agree with Counselor Jelinas. I don't need to repeat anything she said. Thank you. Counselor Pease.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I agree also with Councilman Jelinas. My only question is on the application is, usually when we get these, we have a copy from the police department, the fire department, code enforcement, approval. We don't usually have that on these?
Not on these, Counselor, and that's why the very end statement on the requested action on the front page says contingent upon positive recommendation. Typically what happens, Counselor, is we receive these types of applications months in advance from these organizations, so they know that the council has approved their event, so they can start advertising and promoting their event. However, a lot of their details and logistics aren't necessarily firmed up until about a week or two before the event. So city staff works with the applicant regarding police coverage or whatever is required. So that's why we have the wording there, contingent upon positive recommendation. So the council is approving it, but staff isn't actually issuing it until the departments sign off on all those details. And a lot of time the event organizers don't know those types of details that we need to know until much closer to the actual event. This is unusual because the event's kind of coming up pretty quickly, but typically, as you've seen in these past meetings, I think we've already done maybe Dempsey or whatever, you know, well in advance. But we're not ready to issue that one per se because staff is still working with all the details on them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
Counselor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have one question. The application is dated 5/5, and we're just getting this at a special meeting. What brought that about?
This application, it was actually rescheduled several times due to the rain, and then it was an oversight on staff's part in terms of getting it to you folks.
Okay, just
And
curious.
it was, and if you notice, it's not also signed because it has scribbles all over it that the dates were changed over and over again. So it was retyped so you folks could read what was written.
Thank you, sir.
Further comments? Public comment? Back to the council. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Councilor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3 is absent. Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5? Yes. Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Do
It's a
we,
public meeting, I just want to announce this.
oh, yeah, go ahead, Counselor Scott.
Thank you. So since we now changed this to a public meeting, I just want to put this out there because we won't be meeting again before this event happens. But this is the Youth Advisory Council's Drink Lemonade and Donate School Aid, which is happening at the store next door at the Longley Building on July 6th. That's next Thursday from noon to 4:30. Have a glass of refreshing lemonade and drop off school supplies for ages K through 18 or travel size hygiene items. This is for all the homeless youth. The Youth Advisory Council wanted to really help their peers. And so if we can get folks to donate, school supplies or hygiene supplies, it's all going to go directly to the youth in our community that are homeless. I know that city staff has been notified of this to go. I know that the superintendent has notified all of the school staff to go as well. So I just wanted to put another note out there, and it is on the city's website, being promoted to next Thursday, July 6th, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor Scott. Councilor Clement, did you have something?
Yes, as long as we're announcing stuff, perchance we should announce the public forum to be held the 11th. Time is what, 5:30?
5:30.
5:30 at the
Cafeteria.
high school cafeteria. This having to do with the use of athletic fields in the complex. There's been a lot of activity on social media about that. And some of the comments that have been made out there lead people, or trying to lead people to believe that we are responsible as a body for the damage done up there, when I don't think that is the case. I think those that attended the gathering Sunday, myself, Councilor Scott, Councilor McCarthy, and yourself, Mr. Mayor, we get a pretty good idea of what happened up there. We also got an idea of some of the problems, and I think having the community involved, it's going to take some community involvement to rectify this. That is not a public park. It is an athletic complex that was designed for use of the school department. And I think we have an obligation, several $1 million worth of obligation to the taxpayers of this city to protect and preserve that to the best of our ability. So I think it's important that people know about this. They can show up at that public forum and they can give us their ideas. The community can become involved. I think there'll be plenty of people, plenty of room for people to come. However, I don't believe it'll be heavily attended. That's my...
I hope it is.
Well, I hope it is, but I don't
I do.
know that it will be, because based on the conversations that were held with some people last weekend before the vandalism occurred, there's no interest in anybody. I mean, we had a group of, I think, roughly 18 older people down there playing on those athletic fields who witnessed the damage done, never said a word. It took a resident of the neighborhood to bring it to somebody's attention. And then when these folks were confronted about it, it's not our job, we don't snitch on people. Well, hey, if you want to use these facilities, you've got to give us some help. I think Director Fuller from the school department does an admirable job, and I don't know how, because I don't know what they pay him, but I don't believe it's anything near what he's worth for what he does. And I think it's just terrible that these things are happening. I also think, after looking at this facility, whoever designed those turf fields and put crushed rock as a frame around them, I understand it's for drainage. I've been to a number of turf fields of late due to family obligations. I've yet to see crushed rock at any of them. It's trench drains and heavy grading that kids aren't going to pick up when it weighs 400 or 500 pounds and toss it out in the middle of a turf field. But anyway, that meeting on the 11th, 5:30, high school cafeteria, I would encourage people to attend and give us their feedback on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, can I have I believe we're ready to adjourn at this point.
Sure. Would you like
A motion, yes.
So moved.
Yes, so we have Councilor P, second by Councilor Clement. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Counselor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3? I'm sorry, Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Have a wonderful evening, everyone.